Hello, welcome to Draw Tip Tuesday. My name is Koosje Koenen and I am on my own creative journey. And as I do so, I would love to join you on yours and maybe guide you a little bit. And last week I showed you a way to capture a bigger scene, a scene that feels a little bit overwhelming perhaps. Just where do you start? How do you do this thing? And today I have part 2 for you because there are many ways to tackle this problem or whatever you want to call it. Let's dive right in. I will draw and explain this second technique. Hopefully you will try it too. Okay, we are back at that square in Amsterdam, cold and misty. We are going to draw the same thing, sitting from the same position, but we are going to take a completely different approach today. It's all about taking decisions during the process. That's one of the things that showed in last week's video. So that's actually what's happening today too, only we are drawing with a different approach. Same angle, different approach. Last week we took that bicycle in the foreground to start with, to have landmarks and looking at the layers of the view. Today we are starting with the focal point, the building. Last week I used a fountain pen with a calligraphy nib, which is a nice fat nib. But for this technique, working with a Fude nib would be too bold. So I'm using a rollable pen with waterproof ink in it, so that I can add watercolors later on. I'm starting with the pillars, which are characteristic for the building, and some of the dark spaces that I can see. It's far away, so I don't see that many details, but I'm just really zooming in with my eyes to find some stuff that catches my eye to, again, tell my story of this place. And what I'm doing is I started with one of those pillars, and from here on I am just working around that start. So I am drawing line to line, shape by shape, and this way I'm a lot less skipping around on the page, but just building on each shape that I draw, if you know what I mean. I'm also adding a little bit of shading using hatching lines. And the shading gives me more context. And now I am drawing around the shapes that I have already drawn, gluing shape to shape, slowly, steadily, sort of growing the drawing from its focal point, from the center of the drawing. And so I'm also using that foreground, that big overlap of that tree in the foreground. And from there, I link that to the next big shape that's in the foreground, a lamppost. Really looking at what I see. I can't fit the lamppost fully into the drawing. I think that's just fine. It's a bit of a bummer, of course, but I don't even really think about that. I just really want to capture the vibe. So if because of bad planning or because you started too high or too low on the page, which really happens very often, that really doesn't matter that much. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just go on, go with the flow, go on with what you have, and you will capture whatever you want to talk about because you already have that focal point. You already put that in your drawing. So at any time you could just stop this drawing, if you would be interrupted, you could just stop. There is a lot of information in there. And now you're just embellishing and adding more bits and pieces that you see on the square. But as you can see, I'm skipping around much less than I was in last week's drawing because it's just a completely different technique. You start at the center and then you sort of circle, spiral around, grow the drawing with each shape that you draw. And once you feel confident that you have the most important things in, then you can start skipping around a little bit more in the drawing, looking at the details, filling in the blanks, growing it more and more. I really enjoy this technique. It's a great technique if you do not have a big shape in the foreground, because you start with just focusing on that center point. You filter out all the overwhelming details and just slowly grow into them By adding some color, I'm adding even more focus to the building. But I do feel that something's missing, and often it really helps to focus on some shadows, because that can really bring things together in a drawing. So I'm mixing a sort of a gray with the colors that are on my palette, so I can add some drop shadows, and I add just a little bit of extra shadow on the building to give it just an extra pop of color and a little bit more depth. And there we go. Capturing a bigger scene, part 2. This technique is very different from what I showed you last week, and next week I will show you a third technique. And I think they're all interchangeable. It is really fun to have different techniques under your belt, so that if you are on location or if you want to draw something and you feel a little bit overwhelmed perhaps, then you know that there are different ways to try and capture it. And if one way doesn't work, maybe the other way is better for you or for that particular moment or scene. Next week we'll draw the same scene again with another technique, and that will be part 3. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you do enjoy my Draw Tip Tuesday videos, then please consider to become a patron. I will post a link to my Patreon page below this video, so you can check it out and see if you want to join. I'll see you next week. Bye!